This is the 2014 SV6 VF Holden Commodore. Feast your eyes on this thing. Seriously, if there was a better looking car, I'd like to know about it. This is the wagon, super helpful. I can sleep in the back, except that silly me went and reversed into someone with a tow bar, and well, that is the net result. I do have reversing camera, but I guess I was a bit distracted and I've reversed into something, and well, that has to be repaired. It's kind of annoying because it's standing quite proud. It'll probably need heat to get that back down. So today I'm going to repair that. It breaks my heart to see it. A little bit of rain on there right now, but nonetheless we'll dry that off, we'll clean it up, and we'll repair it. So the things you're going to need for this job are, well, in my case, a hairdryer, because I want to manipulate the plastic a bit, reshape it. A couple of sheets of sandpaper. We got some 180 grit here, some 800, and then some wet and dry. This is 2000 grit. Got myself a sanding block. Also need a bit of this putty, which is just like a car filler, sandable car filler. That's a 2-part car filler. Got some primer also. This is sandable primer, kind of filler primer. And then we've got our base coat red, which in this case is red hot or sting red, which is for this particular vehicle. Whichever car you've got, you'd pick that color. Make sure you color match it. You can use a color code with the car, or you may just know that already. You could look it up online. And of course some clear coat. The clear coat of course will come last, and we'll polish that. In fact, we'll polish the whole bumper and get it nice and shiny again. This is a nice high gloss clear coat. So yeah, these are the things you're going to need. Probably a scraper as well to fill the area with the primer, and a few other bits and pieces, stuff that you probably have lying around the house. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just heating up that area and bringing this top part down. It's a bit hard to tell, but it's sitting a bit proud, a bit higher than over here. So what I'll do is I'll heat that up, and I'll be pushing that down and trying to just get it back into the general shape of this profile over here. It's sort of swollen, I guess, as I made impact with that tow bar. First thing to do is to heat it up. So once I got a good bit of heat in there, just grab something like a screwdriver to work that that bulging area into a position where it's not sitting proud of the profile of the bumper. You know, we can fill this area all day long with bog, that's fine, but if something's sitting proud, you're gonna have to sand it down, and that's just gonna take ages. So just got a straight edge here. You could use any straight edge, a level or a square like this one. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Nothing's sitting high. We will run our sandpaper over this, and it'll really expose this area and get a sense of if there's anything sitting high, and if it is, I'll just sand it back. Plastic sands easily enough, as you know. So just yeah, getting that to a position where we can start to bog fill, and well, yeah, that's step one. So I'm just going to start off with my 180 grit. Now it's pretty coarse sandpaper 180 grit. It's going to make a lot of big scratches in your paint, but that's the idea, to kind of expose the plastic, and then we can use our filler. But it will feel a bit like you're scratching the hell out of your car, and I suppose you are. But well, it's got to be done. You cannot make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. So we've got to start with the sanding. Got myself a sanding block here. Just going to wrap that up, and we'll probably use the sanding block to begin with, but I might take this sander off and just use it by hand to really feel those contours, get right in, because there's areas here that are lower than others, and well, that'll need attention also. Now, if you had a ding that was a bit closer to your plastics, your other plastics and other surfaces on the car, you would use some masking tape so you don't bump into them with your sandpaper. Last thing you want to do is damage another area that, well, is going to cause you grief. So I've got a good bit of distance between where I'm working and this bit of trim here. So not necessary to cover those for the moment. So yeah, just working through this area. One of the things you'll find is that your putty won't want to stick to the paint as well as it will the plastic. So any area that you're going to be applying your filler putty, bring it back to plastic. So which means you're going to have to go through the clear coat, through the base coat, through your primer, and then down into the plastic. Give it a good sand. Don't be shy. Really expose that plastic and give that primer something to bond to, because we will be painting this whole area. So yeah, don't be shy to get in there and take out as much of that paint as you possibly can, because we're only going to be replacing it when we go to paint it again. So I've given this about 20 minutes of sanding, a bit of elbow grease, just exposed all the areas that I want to put my bog. I'm just going to give this a wipe off. Used a bit of wax and grease remover to on a microfiber rag here, and we're just going to expose this area, get rid of any foreign particulates that might foul up our bog as it goes in, our body filler. So just giving that a good wipe off, and that's looking pretty good. So I'm just making up some bog here. Now, the proportion is 50:1. So the bog itself is this grey material, and I've just pulled this out with a scraper. 50:1. So you've got a hardener. Now I've kneaded this quite a bit. When it's in its tube, you want to give it a good knead, squash it around, make sure it's all mixed up in there, this hardener. So 50:1, so you got to look at what you've got there and estimate 1/50th of that amount. You're never going to get it perfectly, that's for sure, but something like 50:1, and then give it a good stir, work that hardener in until you get a nice even color. All right, that's starting to look pretty good. The more hardener you put in, the harder it's going to be quicker. So you definitely don't want to put too much in, or you're going to end up, racing against time. Now I've wiped this surface nice and clean with wax and grease remover, and now I'm just filling this area in with a general sort of a fill to create a surface to work to. Obviously we're going to be sanding a lot of this away, so you don't want to put more in there than necessary. So I'm just trying to fill that up. I already feel that going hard. Usually only takes 5 to 10 minutes before this stuff goes quite hard, and just having a look at that now, I'll probably need to mix up more and go again. I think I may not have enough material, but I'll see. I'll just drag a bit out of this and see if we can't get it nice and close. Well, that's hardened up quite a bit. I can't really work with that anymore. It's gonna just make a mess. So we'll let that dry, probably 30 minutes or so. It's a cold day here, so that's not gonna happen quickly. I'll let it dry, then I'll come back and sand it, see what it looks like, look at it from different angles, use my straight edge to line things up, see if it's sitting proud or if it's still a bit deep, and well, we might give it another go. Okay, so just giving this a nice sand now. This is the first sand I'm giving it, and I'm just taking away all the big chunky bits and smoothing it out. So I've filled up the main area that was a little bit concave in here. Now it's probably going to be hard to pick up, but there is a kind of a trim edge here, like a profile that runs all the way along here. We've got to try and recreate that. It's not very easy to do because you've got to try and maintain that same line all the way throughout, but if you kind of keep running your finger back and forth, then you'll get a sense of how much lower this is, and actually at the moment it's still quite a bit lower in here to up in the area where we kind of got to build to. So it's just a case of laying down more bog, and eventually we'll get it to that same profile. But yeah, it's one of those jobs, it just takes a while. You can't lose faith in what you're doing. You've just got to keep at it and build it up until you're satisfied, because when this is dry and painted and finished, you'll see it on a whole lot of different angles, and until you get it perfect, it will drive you nuts unless it's really, really close to what was there before. So this is just going to take a little while. We'll do a little bit more bog, build it up more, and more sanding. All right, so after a first sand, we're left with something like this. Well, we will get there. You can see some exposed plastic here. Obviously, this little area here was quite dented in. We filled that up. This main area here was also quite pushed down, and well, I'm just trying to work it so that it lines up with that line there beautifully. And well, we've still got to get this, I don't know if you can make that out, just where my finger is, there's a little rise and a line that has to run all the way through and match up with this side. So that'll be the next thing, is to try and build that up a little bit more and match those two edges. But yeah, that's looking pretty good. Okay, so I've done a couple of passes with the filler. It's starting to really take shape. Really focusing on keeping that profile. Of course, this edge here where the bumper turns down, you know, you kind of got to match the corner of that. Not too sharp, not too rounded, just trying to match what's there, because once the paint goes down, anything that's left behind, well, that's what you're going to be left with. A couple of spots over here I noticed I had some paint chips, so I filled those and buffed those back. Now it doesn't look like much, but it's ready for some primer, some spray primer. So I'll mask this area off, up the top and bottom, and so that the primer doesn't go everywhere. And just give it a nice prime. It's sandable primer. Give it a bit of a sand, smooth everything out. Maybe do that twice, and then well, it'll be ready for paint once that dries. Okay, so I've masked the area off. Now, what you'll notice here is you see this newspaper. It's not masked hard up against an edge. So if I have a bit of overspray, it's not gonna make a really sharp line. So if the paint's gonna hit the newspaper, it's gonna kind of wrap around and under and make a soft edge. I probably won't go that far. I'll try and stop my paint here, but for the little bit that does go up there, we don't want a hard edge. Same as down here. This is just a nice soft edge. And also up here, that is a harder edge because that's kind of tracking along the rubber trim there. So down the bottom is the same. It's really no problem to get a hard edge down there, but of course I'm only going to try to go to about here and here. That's looking pretty good. I've followed the profile of the bumper. I mean, it's close, but the primer will take up anything else that, you know, any tiny little pinholes and things. It'll fill those up and I'll be able to sand it back accordingly. All right, so I got myself some spray putty here. Now this is really just like a primer and a filler, and you can sand this. So I'm going to spray this area down. It's a cold day today, so I grabbed some boiling water and put it in a bowl, and I sat this in here for a couple of minutes, and it's warmed that up nicely. So this will flow really well. Give it a good shake. Give it a little bit of a test spray. Okay, so we'll let that dry off a bit. Don't want to overspray or get runs. Might end up with runs down here on the vertical surface. So just give that a couple of minutes. I've got a hairdryer there. I'll just get a little bit of a hairdryer onto it, and that way we can you know, speed up the process of it drying, and then I'll be able to sand that back and start to see how it looks overall. Anywhere that's maybe a little low or maybe a little high for that matter, I can sand it or build it up. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. That's considering it was a straight ding into the back from a tow bar, it had a, you know, concave bit and then a bit that was high. Yeah, I think we've done quite well there. Well, I think that looks pretty good overall. When I grab my torch, I can see just down under that edge there, there's quite a few spots where they're going to need to get sanded flat. But up the top in general, that is looking quite good. It probably just wants a nice sand to smooth it out. But yeah, just down in under here, there's a little bit of material there that wants to come away. So yeah, let's keep cracking on. So just got a nice bit of 800 grit here, because now we're starting to really get down and finessing it. Just getting the finer imperfections gone. If we're using, you know, too coarse of a grit, you'll just start making big skanky scratch marks where we don't want them. Yeah, that feels good. Certainly getting there. Worth just feeling it with your fingertips, because you may not be able to catch it all with your eye. Yeah, that's much better. Feeling good up there. All right, so just giving it a once over. Did get quite a bit of overspray down here, and that'll have to, because that's now quite rough, so we'll have to. Oh, here's a spot too. Okay, so after quite a bit of sanding with my 800 grit, I've got this to right where I want it. And well, now we'll just let that dry for a while, let it cure. I've built that up with lots of layers of this spray putty and sanding, more spray, more sanding, and before you know it, you're very close to perfection. I'll sand this down once again, wipe it off, and look, that feels good. You know, it doesn't look amazing, that's for sure, but it's definitely, you know, it's funny when you do these repairs. I mean, it was really only a little area in here that had the damage, but of course we've had to, you know, stitch it into its area, its neighborhood to you know, make it disappear. And well, that's all part of the fun, you know. You've got to look at it as a big picture, and I think that's pretty acceptable. And I've just started putting my paint down. I stopped there for a minute because while I was heating up my paint, I got a little bit of water on the can and it just flicked up onto inside the paint here. So I've wiped that down, dried it off, and we should be good to proceed. Just gonna get that started. So in theory, this should just disappear and blend right in. Just a couple of thin coats, and patient. Just be patient with this part of the process. Let that kind of settle for a moment, and then we'll do another coat. So I prepared the surface with a wax and grease remover, and yeah, made sure that I got all of the material off, all the dust. It's pretty dusty in this room. I mean, this isn't a spray booth, but it's a garage. So what I'll do is just let that first very thin light coat dry off, and then I'll put another coat in maybe 15 minutes, and then we'll just build it up with paint until I'm satisfied that it's nice and you know, thick enough that we have matched the paint outside of the repair area. But that looks pretty good. I'm actually very happy with that. This is a second coat of paint. And what I'll do is I'll leave that paint. Unfortunately, with clear coats, sometimes they tend to shrink as they dry. And what you'll find is you'll get a orange peel effect where it might start to look like a dry riverbed, and we don't want that. So I'm going to let that paint dry for about 48 hours so that it will be ready for the clear coat when that goes on. But a couple more coats of red, probably another 2 coats of red, and I think we will have finished our base coat paint. Now, I have gone and laid down about 5 layers of clear coat. I did that yesterday. It took probably a couple hours to skin off, but I didn't want to go hitting it with the wet and dry, the 2000 grit, before it was completely dry. So about 24 hours has passed. It was in the garage, so it wasn't in the sun, but this is looking really good. It's turned out quite well. So just giving this a nice wipe down. Now, of course, that's going to be a little bit moist when I hit it with the sandpaper, but that's really not a problem because they do call this wet and dry for a reason. It's actually more beneficial to have a little bit of moisture to lubricate your sandpaper as it glides along the surface. Now, giving this a really light once over, just softening, smoothing out the edge of that, smoothing out the surface of the clear coat. Obviously it goes on just a little bit rough and we want it nice and smooth, so I'm just giving this a really light sand, almost buffing it really. We will come to buffing it also. I've got some compound there. So that's just going to take off that coarse top edge, and then when we hit it with that compound, it'll get it to a perfectly mirror finish, which is really what we're looking for. One of the things I did want to point out was that when I was doing my sanding of our spray putty, was that the this edge here, it's a really important edge to get right. Of course, you know, we were talking a lot about trying to get that profile right through here, that line that runs through, but probably even more importantly is this edge here where the bumper turns down. It's turned out really well. I'm really happy with how it looks, and you know, if it's too sharp or too rounded, I mean, it's super obvious. So it's worth, you know, just being patient, taking your time with it, making sure that you're satisfied with the amount of material that's come off. If you take a little bit too much off, well, you can always put a little bit back by spraying a bit of that putty on and then sanding it off and just building up that shape. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I don't want to overdo it. I feel like I've probably taken off a good bit of the clear coat, and we'll be ready to start to give it a final cut and buff. That looks great. Right. I've got a bottle of compound here. Now this is basically like a wax and a pad. Just gonna pop a little bit of this on. And this is gonna act like a really fine sandpaper, really. It's just a case of popping a bit in the area that you're looking to work on and just giving it a very nice, fine sort of sand, as it were, or buff. Cut and buff. We're really just cutting and buffing this to bring it back to a nice shine, taking any of those fine scratches out of it, and you know, giving it a final once over. If you have an orbital sander or a buffing machine, great. Unfortunately, I live in Queensland and I'm not able to get over the border back into New South Wales to Sydney. where I'm from and I have all my equipment, but yeah, I wasn't prepared to go and buy a buffer just for these little jobs I had, so I'm just doing it by hand. But yeah, if I had the choice, I would most certainly use a machine and we could just really work this in. But a bit of elbow grease and yeah, we're good to go. So that is our final job done. Look, is it perfect? Well, it's pretty close. But you know, you may never get this perfect, but you will save yourself a good couple of $100 paying someone else to do it. And you'll certainly know the satisfaction of doing something for yourself. It's very rewarding. So there you go. Okay, Sonia, what do you think?
I think you've done a fantastic job on this.
Yeah?
I think it looks professional.
Can you see where the ding is? Have a close look.
Not even a little bit. Not even the littlest bit.
Good.
You've even got that edge happening all the way across. Such a good job.
Thank you very much.
Now I can run into more things and you can fix things.